Hi, I'm Jason from StrataGames, and today I'm going to be talking about the Pauper Bans that happened on Monday, how those bans are likely to affect the format going forward, and specifically how that new meta is going to be for Black Sac, my favorite deck, and I know a lot of your favorite deck too. So, here is the metagame breakdown according to MTG Goldfish as of ban Monday. So let's start with the most significant ban, and that is Broodscale. Broodscale is dead, both versions of this deck. This breakdown actually looks like it's putting these decks at 5th and 6th place. In my mind, they're the same deck. They're much more similar than they are dissimilar. And if you look at the meta shares, they're actually 12.8%. So they're together actually the most played deck in the format, which is part of why they needed to get banned. People might try to salvage the deck in some way. I've heard talk of Sadistic Glee on Evolution Witness, which combos with Mere Scrappling and a cost reducer and something else. You can do that. It's going to be a brew. I don't think there's any way that that deck has any real meta presence at this point. Even though this ban only impacted directly these two decks, all decks are going to be impacted by this because we no longer need to put so much hate in our sideboard for this deck. That means a lot of these decks are likely to play fewer snuff outs, fewer hand attack, things like that. We're going to get some more combo decks that rise up in place of this deck, a little more diversity, I would assume, but none of them quite as oppressive and quite as fast or consistent as Broodscale. So the second ban was Kuldotha Rebirth. This was a critical hit to the Kuldotha burn deck. It's definitely not going to go away. There's going to be some version of mono red running around that's going to be a relatively important player in the meta. I do think this is going to take burn a step down. I don't think it's going to be in the top 3, probably even the top 5 decks of the format anymore. It's going to take a little while also for it to find its footing. It's probably going to diverge in 2 ways. Some people are going to try to take it more Spellslinger, Pinger burn, more traditional burn. Those decks have already cropped up a little bit in the last several months, but usually they still played Kuldotha Rebirth because it's just such a good card. The other thing is people might try to take it and lean more into the creatures. Get Foundry Street Denizen in there maybe, Mog Raider or Goblin Sledder, and just generally try to attack with a kind of Goblin angle. Maybe Goblin Grenade itself will even come back into the meta a little bit. And of course, any deck that Broodscale and Burn were really good against are going to get quite a bit better because these decks have been either banned or hit significantly, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. But the other decks that were impacted were Deadly Dispute decks. I think these fall into 3 main categories. The first one being the combo decks that want just as much card draw, filtering, ramp as possible. Tron, Turbo Fog, and Cycle Storm. These are the ones that are probably going to take the biggest hit, I would assume, because Deadly Dispute just makes it so that they can go off a little bit earlier. Cycle Storm, you're happy to sacrifice all of your lands if you're comboing off in the right turn. Turbo Fog just wants to be using as much treasure as possible and banking that. Tron just wants to sacrifice its Ichor Wellsprings to a Deadly Dispute. So all of these decks I think are going to take a bit of a hit. I don't think any of them are going to die because of this though. Grixis Affinity and Jund Wildfire is the second group, these 3-color mid-range decks that use the Deadly Dispute not to combo, but just as a very good draw engine. I think Wildfire is more likely to take a bigger hit here than Affinity because both decks use the Deadly Dispute to draw really effectively, to filter their mana, but Wildfire is the deck that uses it to ramp really efficiently. Whether it's getting a Chrysalis out a turn earlier, or just saving up for like a giant Nyxborn Hydra, it's more likely to need that mana on one big turn. Grixis Affinity, of course, has ways to use that mana, Blood Fountain and Makeshift Munitions, but a lot of times that treasure is actually just going to sit on the field as an affinity count, which isn't going to be too different from a Fanatical Offering. Obviously, I know that the deck is going to get worse because of the Deadly Dispute ban, but I just think Wildfire is going to take a bigger hit. And the third type of deck is the ones that don't care as much about a Deadly Dispute. It's good, but it's not mandatory or even significant in the deck. Glintblade is my main example here. It plays Deadly Dispute and it's happy to, but it's not playing the Wellspring package, so it's not as important it has that sack ability because it cares more about the Scry from Alembus because it replays it several times with the Glint Hawk or a Skyfisher. So the Deadly Dispute is a fine role player, but I don't think it's going to be a significant hit. I think this deck will probably operate just fine on a Fanatical Offering instead, or maybe even just go away from it and lean more into Ephemerates and more artifacts that draw cards potentially. And then of course we have Black Sac, which has been using Deadly Dispute, but I will talk more about that in a little bit. So these are the decks that lost in this ban announcement, but who won? Which decks are better because of these bans? I think there's a few different categories, and the first one is combo decks. Obviously not Broodscale, but other combo decks, Walls, Familiars, Mogwarts, I think are likely to make a bit of a resurgency. Walls hasn't been dead by any means, it's just been a little bit more fringe, but Familiars and Mogwarts have been relatively extinct for a while. It's because a lot of times if you're comboing, you want to be playing one of the better combo decks, and Broodscale was clearly the best combo deck, but also if you're a combo versus combo matchup, whichever combo is faster is just likely to win. It's a race to your combo, and Mogwarts and Walls were both consistently slower than Broodskale. Now, Familiars plays more of a control combo deck, so it has a lot more interaction for Broodskale deck, so it's not necessarily a race, but it still was not a very effective matchup for it. That's one reason they started splashing black was for Snuff Out. And the other thing is these types of decks are usually just not very good against mono red. They die very quickly. It's again a race not to the combo, but just to see if your opponent can kill you before you can get to your combo. Familiars and Mogwarts really bad against Kuldotha. Walls not actually quite as bad because it had so many good effective blockers with high toughness, but in general these are all going to benefit from Broodskale and Kuldotha being banned. And Deadly Dispute does impact Mogwarts as it's its best card draw spell, so it's possible that its banning will hinder Mogwarts coming back to reality, but Familiars and Walls didn't have a single thing banned and just lost a lot of enemies, so I think that these decks are going to be quite a bit better. To back that up, here is some data from Kerblinski, who is an all-star of Pauper. Every week he compiles all of the data from the challenges, so it's great to have that, and then also every couple of months makes a video about the meta as a whole, and here are a couple screenshots from the most recent video. So Kuldotha's best matchups are against generally slower control or combo decks. It's really good against Cycle Storm, Jeskai Ephemerate, Zorius Familiars, Jund Broodskale, obviously some other decks in here as well. Seeing red is going to take a significant hit, any deck that it's really good against is likely to be better because it's not going to have to face an as strong Kuldotha. So because of that, I think these decks are going to be better, except maybe not Broodskale quite as much. So Jeskai Ephemerate leads us into our control decks. Ephemerate, Is It Terror, I think are both likely to get better, but not just control decks, also just grindy, slower decks like Boros Synthesizer, which is actually a deck we've been seeing do well even before the bans. It won the challenge on Sunday, despite the fact that there was Broodskale and Mono Red aplenty. None of these decks took a ban, and specifically the Ephemerate and the Is It Terror decks, both were really bad against Kuldotha and Broodskale. Here's a little bit more data from Kerblinski. Glee matchups, this is showing the 3 different versions of the deck, Wildfire, Jund, and Golgari. Both these decks, Is It Control and Jeskai Ephemerate, were really bad against any version of Glee, but especially the Golgari version, which seemed to be the best version as a whole. I think these decks are likely to make a bit of a comeback. And speaking of comeback, I think another deck is Gruul Panza. This one basically was eradicated when Glee became a thing because it's very bad matchup for it. So much so that I don't have any data on it because no one's been playing Panza recently. It's all shifted to red-green ramp/monsters. So I think Panza is likely to make a return with Broodskale being banned and Kuldotha being worse. It's likely to survive a little bit better. This, of course, could make Familiars worse as opposed to it getting better because Familiars is not happy to see a Panza deck, but overall, I think Panza is going to make a little bit of a comeback. And the deck that I think is going to be the biggest winner of the bans, not necessarily the best deck of the format, is White Weenie. And that's because Broodskale was a horrendous matchup for White Weenie. I say this as a White Weenie player. Jund Broodskale and Golgari Broodskale, both terrible win rates. 9 and 18 there, 7 and 29 previously, 7 and 22. Really, really bad matchups. And so it being just gone is great for us. Now, Mono Red is actually a really good matchup against White Weenie, so that being worse is going to make it so that we're going to see it less. But Broodskale was the real problem for White Weenie, and I think it being gone is going to help quite a bit. Now, in general, any of these decks that didn't receive a ban will probably become better just because the other decks around them will get worse, but I'm not confident that's the case for all of the decks. For example, Blue Fae is already in a very commanding position, looks like it should get even better, but I think because White Weenie is going to get quite a bit better, Blue Fae might actually have a bit of trouble. Going back to this slide, Blue Fae have a very hard time with White Weenie. Small sample size, but 10 wins to White Weenie, only 1 for Mono Blue out of 11 matches is pretty rough. The previous video of Kerblinski's was 6 and 6, so maybe not as polarized as it looks for this. But in general, it's a pretty bad matchup, so I think that one might have a little bit of trouble climbing too much. Also, Bogles is already so high in the meta, way higher than I would have anticipated, but it's actually losing one of its best matchups. Burn is an absolute dog to Bogles. Bogles wins so much more of the time, but Burn getting worse is going to make it so that it doesn't see play against Bogles as much. Then again, Bogles was also bad against Broodskale, so maybe it evens out and Bogles stays pretty fine. But if somehow Bogles becomes the best deck of the format at any point, people put a bunch of edicts in their sideboards, and then Bogles becomes unplayable, and then it dies down, and then it slowly creeps back up. Bogles is a deck that's very easy to sideboard against. You just have to actually dedicate the slots to it. So when you do, it's going to kill it off. So I'm not worried about that becoming the dominant force in the meta by any means. And I don't want to spend too long on these, but I do want to mention the Unbans. Prophetic Prism is back. It's likely to make some sort of impact on Flickertron. I know Tron was very dominant when Prophetic Prism was legal. I don't think in the current meta it's going to be that big of a deal, but I'm not 100% sure. The other one is High Tide released from Eternal Prison. Another deck that's probably going to use Ghostly Flicker, an Archaeomancer, a Mnemonic Wall, Snap, combo shenanigans. I haven't seen an exact list for this deck yet, but to me it sounds like it's kind of going to be a worse Familiars deck. I don't know for sure. I'm willing to be wrong about these. I don't know too much about them. They're in the combo realm, and I don't usually play combo. So feel free to ignore that bit. But the question on everybody's mind, is Black Sac dead because of Deadly Dispute being banned? No, it's not. If you legitimately think this, I don't think you've ever played with Black Sac. Deadly Dispute was a card in the deck and was pretty good, but it's not integral as it is in so many other decks. First off, I've already come to the conclusion before the ban that Corrupted Conviction and Village Rites are both better than Deadly Dispute. So before I put the first copy of Deadly Dispute in a Black Sac deck, I'm already putting 8 of these in. So Deadly Dispute is our copies 9 through 12. Sometimes I don't even play 4 copies of Deadly Dispute. Maybe it's 2 or 3. Those are one of the first cards that I start cutting if I need the room. So I'm not saying they weren't significant and good, and that the banning won't hurt us a little bit, but it's not the most important card in the deck by any means. So what are we going to replace Deadly Dispute with? I think the first obvious answer is Fanatical Offering, and I think the obvious answer might just be the right answer. Of course, we could also look at Reckoner's Bargain and Eviscerator's Insight. I think Reckoner's Bargain, we're only gaining 1 or 2, or with a Bone Picker 4 life. I don't think that life gain is significant enough to make a difference against mono red, and so I don't think we're going to want Bargain. Eviscerator's Insight, I was playing some decks early on that flooded a little bit too much, and so the flashback wasn't unreasonable to get to, but I think that as I've built the deck more, I've gone down on lands, so I think I'm at 16 lands usually, and without as many treasures going around because of Deadly Dispute, among other things, I don't think that we're going to be reaching 5 mana as much as we were before, so I really don't think Eviscerator's Insight is where we want to be. That said, Fanatical Offering is not as good as Deadly Dispute. We're not going to just want to slot 4 of these in if we had 4 disputes in the deck. I think 2, maybe 3 of these is the most we're going to want to do, so we're probably going to want to find some other cards to replace Deadly Dispute with. I do also want to say, though, Fanatical Offering I don't think is strictly worse than Deadly Dispute in this deck. The map token is actually pretty relevant with a couple of our cards. Nested Shambler gives you squirrels equal to its power, and the map token can buff the Nested Shambler's power. And the Infestation Sage makes a flyer, so if we can turn that into a 2/2 flyer, it can attack a lot more efficiently in the air. So I think the map token is actually going to be pretty good with these cards. Nested Shambler I've been liking a lot. I don't actually know if I've showed on the channel yet, but I've been playing with it, mostly in place of Greedy Freebooter. Another reason that I don't think we're going to have as many treasures, because I've been cutting the Freebooters. But I think the offering is actually going to be pretty good with these 2 cards. But, of course, it is worse than Deadly Dispute, especially with Gixian Infiltrator. Gixian Infiltrator is going to get worse because we don't have Deadly Dispute. Disputing one of our fodder creatures to trigger the Infiltrator, get a treasure, which we can sack, trigger the Infiltrator to play a Shambling Ghast, sack that to a Carrion Feeder to grow the Infiltrator, get a treasure. Absolutely great line. It's something we're not going to be able to do now. If we spend our only 2 mana on the Fanatical Offering, the map doesn't sack itself for free, so suddenly we are stifled there and can't go any further, and that makes the Infiltrator quite a bit worse. I don't think it's unplayable. I think we could still fit 1 or 2, but we've been playing 3-ish, and I don't know if 3 is the right number anymore. That said, there are other finishers that we could slot in. I've already been trying this, and in yesterday's video I tried out Bone Picker, so check that out. But Bone Picker I think is probably going to replace some, if not all, of the Infiltrators in my versions. I know some people have already been on this, but I think specifically because of this ban, the Bone Picker is going to be quite a bit better. Bone Picker is another card good with the Fanatical Offering. You can buff it up to be a 4/3 flyer. That means it doesn't trade with a Refurbished Familiar, a Core Skyfisher, or Glinthawk. A lot of relevant cards that I think is going to make the Fanatical Offering not bad at all. But this also continues the chain reaction and makes Unearth worse. Unearth can't target the Bone Picker. I've mentioned this before, that I don't think these 2 cards generally want to be in the same version of the deck. I really liked Unearth with Gixian Infiltrator because it can reanimate a 2-drop, so you're saving yourself mana by reanimating this, and obviously that's not going to be the case anymore. That said, I don't think that this non-bow of Unearth Bone Picker means that we can't run any Unearths, because it's still really good to get back a Carrion Feeder or a Mortician Beetle, or our sideboard cards of a Cursed Marauder and Mesmeric Fiend. I just think we're probably more likely to be running 2 Unearths as opposed to 4 of them. Of course, they have Cycling too, so maybe we can still even keep that pretty high. And I just want to talk real quick about the decks that Black Sac is good and bad against. I've been playing the deck a lot, but no matter how many matches I play, it's going to be a relatively small sample size, so take this with a grain of salt, but in my experience, the decks that we're worst against are Burn, Grixis Affinity, Mono White, and Elves. Burn, White Weenie, and Elves I've tried to become better at with Drown in Sorrows in the sideboard to wipe the board, and I think that has been very helpful. Of course, Burn is going to be taking a big hit here, so I think that's really good for us because it was one of our worst matchups. Grixis Affinity is going to be taking a bit of a hit, and it's one of our worst matchups as well. But also, not having Brood-Scale in the format means we probably don't need to play 2 Snuff-Outs in our sideboard, which opens our sideboard options up a little bit more. Maybe we could play Duress, maybe Divest if we really want to target that Grixis Affinity, since we don't have any other artifact hate. Maybe we can put in another Drown in Sorrow to really make sure we don't lose to Elves. I think the only thing we're losing out here is that White Weenie I think is likely to get better, which is going to be worse for us because it is a good deck against us. But on the whole, I think we're better off here. The decks that we're good against are Dimir control decks, because they usually lean really heavily on Snuff Out, and obviously that doesn't touch us. So Dimir Fae and Control are really good, but also Terror decks, so Control and Blue Terror decks are really good because we can chump their Terrors easily and then attack them, and they can't possibly block all of our attackers. And then also slow combo decks like Tron. We have okay matches against faster combo decks like a Cyclostorm, but something like Tron that's going a little bit slower, we can usually kill them before they go off. Now, Tron did take the Deadly Dispute ban, but these other 3 decks didn't get anything banned out of them, which means they're likely to stay about where they are or maybe even increase in meta share, which is good for us because we have good matches against them. Meanwhile, Burn is likely to drop quite a bit, Grixis Affinity maybe a little bit, and Mono White's going to go up. But I think on the whole, this is a better meta for Black Sac. I think we're going to have a better shot at winning because 2 of our greatest enemies have taken a hit, especially as they scramble and try to replace those banned cards. I think we're going to have a very good opportunity to take a lot of matches. So if you're worried about Black Sac dying, I wouldn't, because I think it's only getting better. We're at 1.7% of the meta right now. I think that number is only going to be going up. So those are my thoughts. This is the first time I've done any sort of ban video or analysis of the meta at all, so please let me know what you think of it, because I'm happy to not make any more of these videos if people hate them or would prefer to watch them from other more informed opinions. But if you like it, let me know in the comments. Just in general, what do you think of what I said? Are you excited for the new meta? Because I am. I think Black Sac, White Weenie, and Glintblade are all likely to get better, which I really like. Jund Wildfire, who knows where that's going to be, and I like that deck too. Anyway, I also started a Patreon recently, so if you're interested in giving me your money, check the link in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all next time.